Then the marches of people with disabilities got targeted. Bill Clinton's personal secretary got involved. And at this point, we are just laughing. The only solution they know is terror and violence.
So to say the very least, the situation in Belarus is complicated. It's currently in the midst of one of the worst crises since the establishment of Belarus itself. The country has witnessed enormous protests against a dictatorship, rigged elections, an ailing economy since last year, with countless people getting arrested. And I cannot emphasize the severity of the situation enough. So we decided to reach out to Sasha, who was herself arrested and tried in the court. Her Instagram is evil.sasha. Sasha was also a victim of a house fire when she was 11 months old and suffered 4th-degree burns on her upper body, including her face, and she also lost her fingers. Despite being disabled, her will to fight for what's right is still strong. Sasha and I discuss about her arrest, the lack of a due process, the sheer dictatorship, the fight for instating the rightful president in the office, and everything you need to know about what goes on in Belarus. I'm your host Mithil, and you are listening to the Curiously Candid Show. So yeah, tell me, how's it going? How's the new year been so far?
Well, where should I start? Man, it definitely has its ups and downs. There were, and still are, quite a few hopes that overall 2021 is going to be a little bit kinder to us compared to 2020. But, you know, recent news kind of aren't being very nice so far. We had some breaking news that just have the country sort of shocked. Basically, one of the heads of one of the armed force departments, basically they have to deal with protest activity. In the past 24 hours, an audio recording was released where a voice very similar to the man who is the head of this department basically is discussing creating concentration camps for protesters. And so people are just sort of shocked and disgusted and also, of course, afraid, obviously. Just when we start thinking that the situation in our country is scary enough and cannot get any scarier, it somehow manages to get even scarier.
So for the listeners who don't know the background of Belarus, just quickly give me a sort of the basic crux of what the whole Belarus political agenda is.
So Belarus became independent after the fall of the Soviet Union around 1991 in those years. And after a brief period of political unrest around 1994, Alexander Lukashenko became the first and so far the only president of the Republic of Belarus. So over the course of his presidency, his many presidencies, he slowly corroded the democratic system of the country and transformed it into a full-blown dictatorship. And last year, 2020, was the first year where a group of people developed a solution that helped track ballots and record falsifications and violations of the voting process. And I believe there were like thousands of violations recorded during the course of the election. One other thing that was different about last year's election was that after doing something that he was known for doing, which was putting in jail all of his major opponents, three teams of three of his opponents, which were Viktor Babarika, Valery Tsepkalo, and Sergei Tikhanovsky. So these three teams gathered into a single united team that was headlined by three women. So these three women gathered around Svetlana Tikhanovskaya because she was the only presidential candidate who was allowed to register from the sort of quote unquote opposition of Lukashenko. And so basically the entire nation rallied around Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and voted for her. And according to all of the evidence and calculations gathered and done by these independent organizations, all of this information can be found online, I believe. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya won the election by like a landslide. The numbers are slightly different here and there, but all of them arrive at the same conclusion, is that she won the election. Despite all that, the official sources, the official organization responsible for counting the votes, declared that Alexander Lukashenko won, where I believe the numbers were that he got 80% of the votes, or 82, something like that. Yes.
They lied to that extent. 82.
Yes, absolutely.
At least lied to like 60%. God damn it.
Yeah, a lot of people talked about it since then, that if he even like gave himself like 50 and Svetlana 40, or like, something like that, people would have found it believable. I would have found it believable, in all honesty. But the level of audacity and confidence of all of it it speaks for itself. I'm not making this up. This is all
true. 80% is just way too much.
Yeah, it's after the official results of the election came out, people went out into the streets to protest. I was there, as well as many other people who gathered in public spaces on the night of August 9th. And we were witness to the crazy level of violence that broke out during that initial crackdown of the first 3 days. And so, again, the government tried to shut things down and shut everything up by shutting down the internet, make sure that everything would be shut down quietly. But as soon as the internet was restored on the third and fourth day after the election, just thousands of accounts of the events started going public, just all over the internet, everywhere. And it was honestly shocking to think that all of this was happening all over my home country, where I never thought something like this was possible. And we've been living like this for a little over 5 months now.
So for these 5 months, how has it been living in Belarus?
It's weird how we just live in this constant duality of being constantly shaken and horrified by the things that we're going through, but also normalizing them for ourselves to a bigger and bigger degree in order to keep surviving them. Like in most recent events, police officers started patrolling the streets in like normal civilian cars, just to be able to travel unnoticed by people. And people just keep getting arrested, just, on the spot, very randomly, very abruptly.
How scary exactly? Like, what's the scale are we talking about here? Like, what's the scale of these arbitrary arrests, and what's the scale of this crackdown? How big is it?
A lot of people are trying to make it out, and I definitely can see the media is showing it now as like, oh, it's not as bad as it was like maybe 4 months ago or 5 months ago, or back in August when only the election just happened. But honestly, I would not say it got better in any way. It changed, the format changed, but still in terms of just living in such conditions, only yesterday, a small group of people gathered for like a little local march in my neighborhood, and like the police officers dressed up as civilians caught them and started chasing people around between the houses. And one man got caught, and they just they threw him onto the ground covered in snow and dirt and started beating him just in the middle of the street, right, just a few houses away from.
So it's happening in front of everybody. They don't really care who's watching or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And they really feel so what's the correct word? Just completely free to do whatever they want. And from an outside perspective, it sounds mind-blowing. Like only yesterday, a group that I'm a part of, we sometimes march in our city in one of the streets, dressed in white and red because it is the color of the protest movement, and carrying white and red umbrellas. And only yesterday, I had to miss that march yesterday, but they gathered to march again, and just a car stopped next to them, and two men left the car and arrested one of the girls just for walking down the street carrying an umbrella.
But then what's the official charge?
The official charge is, I believe, like participating in an unsanctioned mass gathering demonstration.
So it's something not authorized by the government itself.
Yeah, and just like the government doesn't authorize any of it, obviously. And
I mean, why would they authorize it?
Absolutely. And today, the level of bizarre and absurd that it gets is something else entirely. Like, people are getting arrested and they receive huge fines, like hundreds of dollars, and also sometimes jail sentences for putting up flags in their windows and their balconies, because what the judges say during the court hearings, that if you display the so-called unregistered, quote unquote, unregistered political symbols, which right now anything red, white is considered an unregistered political symbol. Even if you like put T-shirts on a rope, like hanging like you did laundry on your balcony, even that now can attract unwanted attention to you. And they say that your own home, like your private residence, your balcony, or the window of your apartment, can be seen as like a demonstration in a public space, which makes no sense whatsoever. But they don't care. They just put the stamp on the paper and send you off to jail for a week or two, or give you a fine that is like $200 or $300. And it keeps piling up. It keeps piling up, and we have absolutely no tools to fight that. It is what it is, and you just can't escape it or oppose it in any way.
So if you dress up as Santa Claus, if your kids like Santa Claus, you shut them up because you're going to get arrested.
Yes. People were literally arrested for dressing in Santa Claus costumes because they are red and white. That is the reality we're living in.
But has it gone to a point where you said that it's very normal and people are normalizing it? But has it gone to a point where even going to jail is a normal thing? That I went to jail last week. It was pretty chill. It was all right. Has it gone to that point?
Yes. Absolutely. It's definitely a coping mechanism for people, but I absolutely see this all the time where people sort of have like joking competitions, like who has spent more times in jail or more days. Like a friend from my...
Man, that is messed up.
Absolutely. A friend from a small group of people that we are friends together. She was arrested a few days before the New Year's. So she spent New Year's Eve in jail. And on a few days ago, we gathered together to go like meet her when she was released. And we actually had like an entire small event for her where we gathered in like a parking lot of a gas station, like somewhere outside the city. It was snowing, it was cold, but we didn't care. There was like 20 of us, and we brought a little Christmas tree, some snacks and some fruit and a cake. And we had like a whole New Year's party for her in a parking lot because she missed New Year's Eve because she was in jail. And we were just standing there talking and joking about it. And people in the crowd were at some point, because she was talking, of course, about her experience and how she spent time in the prison cell and who she met there and what they did for 15 days. And some of the guys who were in the crowd, because there are, I believe, 3 main detention centers where people arrested for quote unquote political motives get sent. And some people in the crowd had gone to each one of these 3. So they started like sharing their stories and comparing like which one was better, where the food was better, where the guards were nicer. And it's like, stuff doesn't begin to cover it. It is beyond messed up. And it's sort of, sometimes we sort of lean back and we look at ourselves and our living situations and we just go, we are going to spend so much money for therapy a few years from now. It's going to be insane because the things we are living through is nuts. It's nuts.
And how's the treatment in jail in general?
It's not great, to be honest.
I mean, of course it's not great, but like, but is it bad? Like they get beaten or stuff? What happens in jail? Just like thrown off and not cared about? How does it work?
Honestly, I can't speak from my own experience. I haven't gone through that one yet myself. But reading all the stories and hearing all the stories from all of the people who have been through that experience, it's one thing that I can say it's very different. A lot of it depends on just who are the guys on shift while you're there. Because many people speak about the same places where for someone it was their best experience and for someone it was their worst. It just like depends on how lucky or unlucky you get. But all of it, of course, is not that great. And also comparing the stories, it's definitely obvious that men and young men get a lot worse treatment than women who get sent to these detention centers, where and some women also sort of get the bad end of the stick, where some people come out and they say like it was kind of uncomfortable, but it was bearable. And then some people who come out tell just horror stories about how they were beaten, they weren't allowed to shower for 2 weeks, their mattresses were taken away, and they had to sleep on like just a plain wooden bench, nothing on it, or the floor, or something like that, just having only their own jacket to cover up. In some cells, people tell stories that there were fleas, the toilet was broken, or there was no running water, or it was really, really cold. Stories are very different, and it's all of it is like different levels of bad.
So in that sense, there could be some guards or some personnel who are on duty that day who are nice and who maybe are compassionate with the people who are coming in, because as you said, and there are 3 centers which are destined for this, with 3 centers allocated for this purpose. So maybe there's a possibility that some of them are actually nice people who understand that they don't need to go an extra mile to torture these people.
I would say there are definitely those who are less intentionally cruel about it. They're still aware that they are part of the system, and they're still following the orders that tell them to keep these people where they are and, keep control over them. And I don't know if I would necessarily say that just the simple fact that they are not extra cruel and evil about it paints them in a positive light. Maybe it does compared to the other, but overall, it's still not a great experience.
Yeah. And what is your experience, man? Because you posted a picture on Instagram where you were arrested and you talked about your trial being a shit show. What happened exactly?
Absolutely. So the arrest was not great, but not as bad compared to some other stories. We were having an all-female march on a Saturday. It had sort of become a tradition at that point, and it was 19th of September. And so on that day, apparently the armed forces had an order to just sort of pack up and arrest as many people as possible. Because I believe like most of the participants of that march were arrested, like over, I think, 400 people just in one sweep. And we were not tortured or beaten in any way, just psychologically abused for a bit. But overall, we were just brought to the police station and held there for around 5 hours, and then our personal information was recorded, and we were released like one by one. And then a few months later, in early November, was my court hearing for my for this arrest. The way everything sort of happened during my court hearing just left me and my lawyer just sort of, it's one of those situations where it would be funny if you weren't so aware that this, as I eloquently put, shit show, was the court system, the system that's supposed to be working like well. Because the person who testified against me, who was allegedly a witness of me being like an active protester, an active participant of the Women's March, he was connected to the hearing through a laptop screen via Skype. He was wearing a mask, did not get to see his face.
So they didn't even identify as like who he is.
Yeah.
Could be anybody.
Yeah. He did say some sort of name and last name, but before the hearing, my lawyer told me that all of those names are always fake. None of these people exist or work in any of the police stations. And so the person who was my witness was actually a police officer on duty that day, whose job was to be dressed in civilian clothes and record protesters or potential protesters on a little camcorder. And then someone else took the footage that he recorded and made like screen grabs of all of the faces of the different like women or people who were there that day. And he identified me from that screen grab. So he couldn't even confidently testify that I was there and he was there and he saw me on that street that day. And the funniest part was that when my lawyer asked him, well, when you saw this woman then, would you say that there was something different about her appearance? And first he said it implying like my outer appearance, like my clothes, if I was wearing anything strange or carrying anything strange in my hands. And if you saw the photo, and I don't know if you're able to sort of insert it or display it in some way.
Yeah.
I was dressed in a rather particular way.
Yeah. We'll put that over on YouTube, but yes.
yeah, was basically dressed like a fancy white flag, just on two legs.
Yeah.
And so my lawyer asks that, and the witness goes, "No, I wouldn't say that there was anything unusual about her clothes or anything." And we in the courtroom are just like glancing at each other. And then my lawyer asks, "Would you say that there was anything unusual or different about her physical appearance?"
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, of course, my quite obvious, quite noticeable physical disabilities, which I am not ashamed of. I'm not hiding them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm comfortable talking about them. And they are obviously noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
And the witness again goes like, "No, I think she was average. I wouldn't say there was anything about her.
Oh my God.
Nothing stood out." And at this point, we are just laughing. We were laughing in the courtroom to the point that the judge kicked out one of my friends who were sitting in the back.
How did the judge did not laugh at that one?
For some reason, she didn't find that funny. I don't know why. It escaped my attention, I didn't notice why. And so at that point, we were like, okay, this is going to be a strange ride.
Mm-hmm.
And so me and my lawyer, we were basically pushing this line saying like, I was not participating in any march.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going for a walk in the area
Mm-hmm.
when I was arrested. And the judge calls for a break, leaves, comes back several minutes later, opens her phone, and starts reading an article about my arrest. That is the thing that made it like the biggest thing that pushed it into the shit show territory for me, was that judges are not supposed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then she called me over and shows me a photo, that very photo that I posted on Instagram, of me like being dragged by 3 huge guys, and asks like, "Is that you? Do you have anything to say about this photo?" And I'm looking at it, I'm looking at her, and I'm like, well, yes, obviously I was detained that day. That is the reason why I'm here.
I mean, is she even allowed to question you like that?
No, absolutely not. And so at that point, we are just like, okay, I see where this is going. And so she called another break. She left. She came back and just eyes down, not looking at anyone. She just read quickly the sentence,
judgment,
and just said like, "Oh, here's your fine. Here's the decision. Bye."
What was the final outcome of the trial?
The fine was a bit less than $200.
Okay.
The total amount.
Mm-hmm.
And my lawyer and we actually submitted, I believe, appeal, trying to state that the decision was unjust. It was too big, and there was not enough evidence that I was actually doing something that was breaking or violating any sort of law. But of course, nobody cared about it.
Are there many lawyers who are actually actively helping out protesters and defendants like you? And if so, aren't they also at risk of being detained or themselves being prosecuted or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are fortunately quite a few. For a lot of people, it's just work. They're just hired for these cases, and they take them, and that's fine. The cases that really pose any sort of danger to them are the more high-profile ones. Like if they agree to represent one of the leaders of the opposition, like Maria Kolesnikova or Maxim Znak or any of the other, high-ranking people who took a very public stance and, were prosecuted for that. There had been a few cases where, I think 2 or 3 cases where the lawyers themselves were detained for agreeing to represent a high-ranking member of the opposition. And I believe there were 1 or 2 cases where the lawyers lost their license.
So to me, it seems like that the government is clamping down on every action which it perceives as a threat.
They have no other means of influence onto the people, onto the public, apart from violence. That's all they have. So all we can do, I think, is keep rocking the boat and keep showing the world that we do not agree to this, and this government is not legitimate, and we did not elect it, and we do not support it.
So stay tuned for the next episode where we go into much more detail about Sasha's disability and how they played a factor in Sasha's participation in these protests. You have been listening to the Curiously Candid Show. This show is brought to you by the support of the University of Hong Kong. I'm your host Mithil, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel where we post clips, behind the scenes and more. Make sure you also subscribe to us on whichever platforms you get your podcast from, and I'll see you all in the next one.